Hello students, let's go ahead with the next module of clause analysis. Now students, we have already seen how to identify the main clause, the subordinate clause, and also we've seen how to identify the types of subordinate clauses with the help of questions. That is, we have seen how to identify the noun clause, the adjective clause, and 3 types of adverb clauses. But how do we identify the remaining 6 types? So in this module, we are going to do the detailed study of the types of adverb clauses. Now we know there are 9 types of adverb clauses. We have seen that before: time, place, manner, reason, purpose, result, contrast, condition, and comparison. We have also seen that time, place, manner can be identified with the help of questions: when, where, how. And we have seen that the remaining 6 can be identified with the help of subordinators. It is this that we are going to learn in detail here in this module, how to identify with the help of subordinators. Let's go ahead. Okay, now let us quickly revise how to identify the different types of adverb clauses through this tabular form. So 1, time. We know that for time we have the question when, but still let's take a look at the subordinators: when, whenever, while, till, until, after, before, since. These are the kind of subordinators that would be there in adverb clause of time. Now let's take an example. She left after she had given her vote. Now students, here we are not going to go into details of how to identify the main clause and subordinate clause. We've done that earlier. So assuming you know that, here we have after she had given her vote as the subordinate clause and she left as the main clause. Now we have to ask a question in such a way that we get the answer as the subordinate clause. So what's the question? When did she leave? Of course the answer is after she had given her vote. Therefore what is it? It is adverb clause of time. Now let's take another one. Place. Question is where. And we have some subordinators here: where, wherever. Let's take an example. He makes friends wherever he goes. Now students, here again he makes friends is the main clause, wherever he goes is the subordinate clause. Your question is, where does he make friends? Answer is wherever he goes. Therefore it is adverb clause of place. Next, we come to the next one, that is manner. Now for manner, if you remember, we have the question how, and we have these subordinators as if. Let's take an example here. It happened as I told you. Again, the main clause is in black there. It happened as I told you is the subordinate clause. The question is, how did it happen? And the answer is as I told you. Now this answers the question how, therefore it is adverb clause of manner. So students, if you see, observe over here, these questions help us, that is when, where, how, help us to get the answer adverb clause of time, place, and manner. So there is no need to learn these subordinators. Simple. For these 3 types, don't learn the subordinators. The questions are enough to give you the answer. But for the remaining 6 types, you will have to know your subordinators. So here, identify the remaining 6 types. What are the 6 types? Reason, purpose, result, contrast, condition, comparison, with the help of subordinators. So first, let us learn the subordinators. 1, reason. What are the subordinators for reason? As, since, because. Simple students. If you read it 3-4 times, you will learn these subordinators. So as, since, because. Let us take an example. But then before that, let's first check all the subordinators. We have purpose, and for purpose we have so that, such that, in order that. Then we have result. Here we will have so dot dot that and such dot dot that, meaning so and such will be in the main clause and the that will be in the subordinate clause. That is why the dot dot dot, to separate the two. Now let's take examples. Okay, the first one. He will eat because he is hungry. Now we know he will eat is the main clause, because he is hungry is the subordinate clause. Students, first you have to ask the questions: what, which, when, where, how. Here the questions will not help. So now we identify this with the help of subordinator. See here, the subordinator is because, and because is the subordinator for reason. Therefore, what is the answer? Adverb clause of reason. Next one. We eat so that we may live. Students, we eat is the main clause. So that we may live is the subordinate clause. It does not answer what, which, when, where, how. Now we take a look at the subordinator so that, and we know that so that comes in adverb clause of purpose, and therefore here this is subordinate adverb clause of purpose. So you just have to identify with the help of the subordinator, but first ask questions. Next, coming to result. He was so happy that he jumped with joy. Now when you look at the subordinate clause that he jumped with joy, it starts with that, and you'll wonder, but there is no subordinator starting with that, for which we will get an answer as an adverb clause. So now remember, we have so ... that. Secondly, first ask your questions. None of the questions are going to be answered here, so you know it is one of the adverb types, and because you see the so and the that, you know that it is adverb clause of result. So here, when we see that the subordinator is so ... that, we know that the answer is adverb clause of result. Okay, let's take a look at the remaining three types. That is, we start with contrast. So the subordinators for contrast are though, although, even if. We have condition. Here we have if, unless, whether. Then we have comparison, and here we have as ... as, so ... as. That means the first as and so will be in the main clause, and the second as and as will be in the subordinate clause. Basically, this is when you use a degree of comparison. So students, let's understand this with examples now. Though it was cloudy, it did not rain. Again, it did not rain is the main clause. Though it was cloudy is the subordinate clause. It does not answer any of the questions what, which, when, where, how. So we look at the subordinator, and we know that the subordinator is though, and because it is though, we know that it is adverb clause of contrast. So you must learn your subordinators very well, students. Now look at the next one. Here, if I make a promise, I keep it. Again, I keep it is the main clause. If I make a promise is the subordinate clause. I ask the questions. I keep it what, which, when, where, how. I don't get the answer as the subordinate clause. So now I look at the subordinator. Here the subordinator is if. Therefore, it is adverb clause of condition. Now, let's go to the next example. He is not so rich as he appears. Again, he is not so rich is the main clause. As he appears is the subordinate clause. Now, students, if you ask the questions, you will not get the answer as the subordinate clause. So, I look at the subordinators. Now, here we have so and as. So in the main clause, as in the subordinate clause. There is definitely a comparison, and therefore, because the subordinator is so ... as, here the answer is adverb clause of comparison. Students, this is how we identify adverb clauses. Three types with the help of questions. When, where, how. That is time, place, manner. And the remaining six types, you must know your subordinators very well. Students, let's now go on to an exercise. Identify and analyze the clauses. Specifically here we are going to deal with adverb clauses. So the first one. The sparrow can bring water to you if you ask the cactus for help. Quickly, let us take a look at the steps. Identify the subordinator. We know here it is if. And the finite verb. So here we know can, bring, and ask. Okay. Next one. Separate the main clause and the subordinate clause. How do you do that? Subordinate clause starts with the subordinator, and here we have if as the subordinator. It starts there, ends before the second finite verb. Now if you go till the end, there's only one finite verb, so of course it will end here after the sentence. So if you ask the cactus for help becomes your subordinate clause. Next, students, identify the type of subordinate clause, and you will do that first by asking the questions. What are the questions? Once again, what? Noun clause. Which? Adjective clause. When, where, how? Adverb clause of time, place, manner. Now, can you ask any question to the main clause here and get the answer as the subordinate clause? No. So what do? We look at the subordinator if. Okay. So as I said, if you don't get an answer to the above questions, that is what, which, when, where, how, then check the subordinator and identify the type of adverb clause. So here you can see that the subordinator is if, and because the subordinator is if, the answer is adverb clause of condition. So how do you write the answer? The sparrow can bring water to you, main clause. If you ask the cactus for help, subordinate adverb clause of condition. Let's take another sentence. Since I was a sick child, I lived with my grandfather. Very simple, students. First, the subordinator, since. Next, the finite verbs, was and lived. Next, separate the main clause and the subordinate clause. Start with the subordinate clause, starting with the subordinator since. Now, can you end it after the whole sentence? No. You start with the subordinator and end just before the second finite verb. Students, the second finite verb is lived, but I can't end it just before lived because there's a subject there, I. So I end it with the word child. Since I was a sick child becomes your subordinate clause. I lived with my grandfather becomes the main clause. Next, to identify the different types of subordinate clauses, ask the question to the main clause and in such a way that the answer should be the subordinate clause. Students, what are the questions? Remember, what, which, when, where, how. Are we getting the answer? No. I cannot ask these questions and get the answer. So remember, first you must ask the questions. If you don't get an answer to the question, then check the type of subordinator. Now look at this, okay? We've taken these small patches from the earlier table. So here, reason, as, since, because. And here we have the subordinator since, and therefore this is adverb clause of reason. How do you write the answer? I lived with my grandfather, main clause. Since I was a sick child, subordinate adverb clause of reason. Students, that is how simple it is to identify your 9 types of adverb clauses.